We got a lot of stuff to cover tonight, and let's get to work on covering it. This is the screen of the mind map for everything that we're covering tonight. As you can see, we've got a ton of stuff to go over, so let's start up at the top. And again, welcome everybody. There are two types of people watching tonight's webcast. There are those of you who I have invited to join the webcast, and for those of you that I've invited, thank you so much for joining us. This is a blast. There is also members of the Podcast Expert Blueprint who are watching this as well. For Podcast Expert Blueprinters, I salute you. And the fact of the matter is, I've got an entirely different iPad for the sole reason of monitoring what you guys are doing and make sure everything is okay there. As always, my students come first. Now, one of the promises Podcast Expert Blueprinters was the ability for me to promote your podcast on this big broadcast. I know we did this year's batch a little bit later than normal, so not all of you are ready for promotion, but I think you'll get a chance to see what promotion is like, and we'll go from there. So, everything looks to be going well. Let's chat a little bit about who I am, my history in podcasting, and why you might want to consider paying attention during today's webcast. I have been in podcasting for a long time. I've had a number of shows. I was actually back when there were lists of podcasts out there. Not just directories and that type of thing. I was there. I wrote the Business Podcasting Bible way back when. The funny thing about the Business Podcasting Bible is that it is a book that, although still very, very true in every way, was actually written before the iPhone came out. There isn't a week goes by where I don't get an email from a random person saying, "Hey, Paul, I read the book. I like what you had to say. I definitely want to go there. I definitely want to go in that direction, but what about the iPhone?" Well, I've been in it so long that started this before we even knew what the iPhone was. I've been making my money in podcasting for quite some time now, through consulting, book authoring, podcasting, and I've got some training courses as well. So this is not a flash in the pan. This is someone who's been doing this for over a decade, and gosh darn it, I am having a blast doing it. So let's chat about a couple little things here. Number one, we are doing this inside of YouTube, and as you can see over here inside of YouTube, there is the ability to comment. You can see here, Steve Baker says, "Funky talking head effect." Well, thank you so much, Steve Baker. That's always fun, and thanks, Steve. For a minute, I didn't know if I was going to be able to comment. You can ask questions inside of this interface. This will help us to interact, will help us to understand what's going on and go from there. And will make for a better event for everybody, and should make for a better time. If you want the mind map for tonight, everybody always wants to see what it is that you're doing, what it is that you've got. If you head over to podcastexpertblueprint.com, podcastexpertblueprint.com, at least while we're doing this live, this is the program that you've got a chance to pick up if you'd like. But right down here at the bottom, you can see there's the pick up the mind map. You can grab the mind map for tonight's presentation there. Nice and easy for you. I am going to make the Podcast Expert Blueprint available tonight to a small group of folk. I'll probably go for a couple of days, and then from there, we're going to lock it up. I don't do general, consistent opening up of the Podcast Expert Blueprint. You'll see why. It makes a lot of sense. I'm actually offering a bonus right now that is pretty fantastic. And of course, Podcast Expert Blueprint 2015ers do know that you get access to that as well. So don't worry about that. This recording, basically, if you head out to the Podcast Expert Blueprint, it's available to pick up. Go for it. If it isn't, there'll be a waiting list, and we'll go from there. All right. The dangers of going live. This is a live show. This is a one-man show. This is me at my home computer interacting with you. Now, this is a blast and a half, and I love doing this kind of thing, but realize that I don't have a producer I can yell at. I don't have cameramen I can yell at and that type of thing. Stan wants to know if this is YouTube Live or Hangouts. Stan, this is definitely YouTube Live. YouTube Live is considerably more stable than Hangouts, and you don't get that silly little Google thing in the upper right-hand corner. So this also allows me to do fun photo shots like, there I am, big giant head, there I am with no head, and we'll go, we can go back from there. As a matter of fact, you can see here, I'm also monitoring the screen with the questions there that you can take a look at and go from. If something happens, hang tight. I will finish this. We'll get to the Q&A at the end. I actually have a laptop over there that has all of, that is connected to YouTube via my phone. In case anything happens, then we'll get you a technical difficulty statement. Go back there as we have to reboot. I did do a webcast earlier this week where something froze. Yes, these things happen, and we will go from there. Elizabeth Harrington said, just thinking how back to your wisdom when I started, 2016 is going to be an amazing year for podcasting. Thank you so much, Elizabeth. It is going to be a fun time. Now, if you are watching the replay of this and something did go wacky, I get the privilege of editing this bad boy out of the replay, which is something that always makes me very, very happy. It's also definitely a reason to attend things live. You want to enjoy things live. It's just kind of the way you do things, and you get to watch Paul work without a net. Always a fascinating thing. Now, I'm going to take comments throughout. Feel free to make comments inside of YouTube. If you're watching inside of the app, you will need to head out to YouTube to ask the questions there. That's just kind of the nature of the beast. The Q&A I will take at times. I'll look. If it makes sense, we'll go from there. At the end, we'll go through it. Now, one of the things I insist on with Q&A, or insist is probably too strong, one of the things that I really encourage with Q&A is ask the type of question that everybody benefits from. Asking a specific question about yourself or a specific thing that you're doing, it then becomes one-on-one consulting, and everybody else who's watching and everybody else who's looking at the replay and that kind of thing, they don't get the chance to benefit from it. If you just ask your question a little bit differently, in such a way that everybody who can benefit from it will go, will be at a better place. And yes, I can move the gigantic head, or I can get rid of the gigantic head as well. We'll also jump over to things. What's kind of fun, actually, a couple things I wanted to show you. This is the How to Podcast app. We've got some of you watching us on the How to Podcast app. That is a blast. Bunch of fun. Couple people have asked questions. Yale wants to know if it's having problems, and Steve says streaming's just fine. Looking at the YouTube report and response, YouTube says everything's going okay. So I'm going to guess, Yale, that it's probably on your side. Tamar says, I remember you from 10X a long time ago. Wow. Back in the Gold Coast, I would head back there so fast. I had such a blast doing that event way back when. Yeah, very, very, very cool. The best kinds of Q&A are the ones that everybody learns from, and we'll take a look at those at the end. So let's start this. Look at that. Norva just jumped on. Hi, Paul. Good morning from the UK. Stan says lots of start-stop. I'm moving from Firefox to Chrome. Yeah, you definitely might want to do that. And if you did sign up for this, we definitely have the ability to get you the replay of this. If you went out to paulcolligan.com/big, everybody who gave me their email address will do the replay. And of course, if you're doing the app, we'll get the replay up on the app as well if you're having some sort of connection problem. But yes, YouTube right now reports that the health of the stream is good. And I'm going to believe YouTube, and I've been testing this for about an hour, and everything looks pretty good there. So let's chat about some paradigm shifts. Three things are happening in podcasting that's really, really, really important. And I've chatted about these in different places on podcasts and YouTube videos and that type of thing, but I wanted to put them together because I think they're important, especially important when they come together. Podcasting, I mentioned earlier in this recording that when I did the podcast, the Business Podcasting Bible, we were actually in a situation where we didn't even have an iPhone. We didn't have smartphones. Now podcasting is almost ubiquitous. Google Play has introduced, or is going to introduce, podcasting. The date for all of this happens is not set yet, but we believe it's coming soon. We're recording this just a couple of days before Christmas. I think with a lot of people getting Android devices, at least Google hoping everybody's getting Android devices for Christmas, it would make sense for them to release it very, very, very soon. The other thing that's really interesting is Pandora has turned on Serial on the Pandora thing. And there's all these people who are saying, oh, Pandora will never do podcasting. But the fact of the matter is, well, they are doing podcasting. They're doing Pandora. And the fact of the matter is, when they realize that free content that they can put ads on, which is going to come cheaper than musical content, I predict you're going to see that happen very, very quickly. So it's no longer a question of how do I get a podcast? It's going to become a question of how will I listen to my podcast? And that jump is going to be very, very, very important. Dennis Topman says, love to have an A to Z guide on how to do this step by step. We'll chat about some options, but really, Dennis, there's two issues at play here. There's the technology of podcasting, which is actually very easy, and there are some people who have made it really, really complicated. I'll show you something that I'm doing that will show you how painfully easy it is. But then there's the whole process of how do you devise a show that people listen to, that people interact with, something that can help you make you money, that type of thing. That's harder to do. We also have an option for that. But remember, just because you podcast does not mean that the world is going to be consuming what it is that you have to offer. If you podcast correctly, you've got some pretty exciting opportunities out there. So thank you, Dennis, for the question, but I wanted to do what I could to put it into perspective for everybody, because I think that kind of stuff is very, very important. So that's number one. Number two is the new Apple TV, Apple TV number 4. It's a new device, and they've done two things that are really, really interesting. Number one, universal search. Now, universal search is not in any way, shape, or form universal. It's really a concept at this point. But here at the Colligan house, we're big Doctor Who fans. And I can go to the Siri remote, I can click the microphone button, I can say Doctor Who, and it'll show me options for Doctor Who on Netflix, show me options for Doctor Who on Hulu, it'll show me options for Doctor Who on iTunes. Right now, the universal search is really only across those, but universal search is going to become bigger and bigger. What does this mean? Could we see a time when universal search is going to include podcasts? Yes, I think we're going to see that. And what does this mean? Well, if you think about it, Apple does better. Search is better when all the options are there. If I'm looking for content about X, we've got Elizabeth here from the New Prime Time. If I'm looking for the information for Elizabeth's group, and there's a podcast about it, the Apple TV is going to serve me better if the Apple TV gives me that information. So that's really, really important and really, really key. So how do we get there? That's the second part of all this, is apps are now part of the Apple TV 4 strategy. There's, yes, apps for Hulu and Netflix and that type of thing, but there's apps for a lot of other plays in there as well. I am currently working on an app for Apple TV because we really have to have this kind of thing. And I think it's what's going to get us into universal search. Now, does the whole world have Apple TVs? No. But what Apple does, people copy. What they do on the Apple TV, the other connected TVs are going to copy. What they do on the iPhone, the other phones are going to copy. What they do on the iPad, other tablets are going to copy. And so if content becomes part of universal search because of an app strategy, we're at a really, really, really cool place. I know some of you have been watching me for a while, going, okay, Paul, I get part of why you're doing the app thing. That's really only part of the app thing. And then the last part of the paradigm shift, and this is a bit interesting, but there honestly at this point is just really too much content. I'm just going to say it. There's too much content. I read a stat today that somebody said that we are now in an era where there's twice as much TV shows as there was just a couple of years ago. And there's more movies, and there's more content, and there's more podcasts, and there's more all these things. So what's going to happen is there's no more clear winners anymore, and shows are going to have smaller and smaller and more niche audiences, which means it's going to be harder to find the show. But once you have the show, you're going to keep the show. I think this is really important. It's going to be harder to find you because there's going to be so much competition. But once they find you, keeping you there is really, really key. That's part of podcasting. That's part of apps. That's part of universal search. Something to think about. So too much content has brought us in a place where it's harder to find, but easier to keep. A couple questions have popped up. Robert Miller wants to say, do you have any up-to-date info on access to podcast Encore audio systems similar to Sirius? Well, Robert, here's the deal, buddy. Every American car in 2016 is going to have a podcast option. Every American car in 2016 is going to have a podcast option. And here's the deal. My phone right now My iPhone, I'm with T-Mobile, not just an iPhone thing, but T-Mobile right now doesn't include data from platforms such as Google Play or platforms such as iHeartRadio and Apple Music. Right now, Google Play will stream your podcasts. Well, will very, very, very soon. Won't count towards your data. And iHeartRadio, if your show's in iHeartRadio, won't count towards your data. And Apple Music right now, the way podcasts are done, it's going to come differently. We're not quite sure. But the fact of the matter is, we're getting to unlimited data really, really easy. So we have all these devices that have the podcast options, but we've also got phones and smart devices that's going to make it much, much easier to get podcast content. My wife has an older car. Don't tell her, she's not going to be watching this, but she just got an older classic car type of situation. And one of the things she's getting for her Christmas present is a little adapter that's going to take the Bluetooth from her phone with her unlimited data and is going to broadcast it through the FM stereo. So here's a car built in 1995, I think it is. And she's going to be able to listen to podcasts on that. So updated information, yeah, pretty much everybody has an option. Dave Jackson says, Robert, if you have a smartphone and a Bluetooth-enabled car, Dave has a Prius, you can connect your car without cables. Exactly. Exactly where I was going here. So the thing is, it's bigger than Sirius. And the thing about Sirius is, Sirius you have to pay, and all these satellite stations you have to pay a certain amount of dollars for. You don't have to pay that for podcasting. And that's one of the real benefits to it. So some other 2016 changes that excite me, or changes. There's some tools that really excite me. There's a company called Zapier, Zapier, and Zapier.com is basically, we're going to go out to their webpage really quickly. They are I'm not going to show you my special zaps there for too long, but Zapier is essentially a business version of If This Then That. And if you don't know If This Then That, basically what it is you can program now web-based services. What does that mean? Well, that means things like you can tell Zapier, when I podcast my show, automatically promote it on Twitter. When I podcast my show, automatically put it on Facebook, automatically put it on all the places that are connected to it. If This Then That does some of those, Zapier does some of those. But we can automate the publishing process in some very cool ways. And not just in a way with when I publish my show, go to social, but when I publish my show, email my audience or update my website or do all sorts of things. We're in a situation now where we can automate so much of the stuff that used to be step-by-step kind of stuff. We can automate it, which is very cool. There's a tool called Aphonic, and Aphonic, man, Aphonic does not get the press that Aphonic deserves. Aphonic.com is a service that does cleaning and does leveling and does a whole bunch of stuff. You can see I got a bunch of clients inside of here. You can see I've bought some hours up against this, but Aphonic is another tool that makes it possible to automate the process. And I'm going to be chatting a little bit about podcast production with the phone in a second here. But the fact of the matter is, we are able to do a ton of automation right now. The Thinking Out Loud podcast, here's how I podcast Thinking Out Loud. Pick up my phone, I take the Aphonic app, I record into it, and it publishes it. That's it. There's no editors, there's no designers, there's none of these things. The whole process is there. These two tools are really crazy. There's a tool called Ferrite, Ferrite. It's an iOS app for editing audio. It just a couple of days ago released a version that lets you do a lossless mix, and you can publish that straight to Aphonic. What does that mean? That means I can take my iPad on the road and do a full edit. Before there was BossJock, which was a very cool app for a live podcasting type of situation. But with Ferrite or however you pronounce it, I can now take an event, record it, add music, mix in things, that kind of stuff, and publish it as well. Very cool. And then there's even the Workflow app. And the Workflow app is a product that lets you do automated things from your phone in some really cool ways that I want to utilize. And the thing is, if podcasters in the past have had a tendency to do sort of the I'm going to spend 5 minutes on my content and then I'm going to spend 2 hours publishing my content kind of thing. One of you asked earlier here, Robert, Dennis asked about a step-by-step thing. What's interesting is people used to spend really 5 minutes on the content and an hour on the publishing, but now with things like Zapier and Aphonic and Ferrite and Workflow, we can do the publishing automatically by ourselves, which is very, very, very cool. Make a comment in here if you'd like about how podcasting would change for you if it was if it was much, much, much easier to do. The fact that these tools are here, that these services are here, really, really, really excites me. So that's what I want to do there. I am going to pull up something here. There is the chat that's going on. I forgot to do this, so let me pull this up really quickly. This is the Podcast Expert Blueprint membership site. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to quickly log in. And I'm going to show you the whole program. Or we're going to walk through the 6 pillars of podcasting because it's very, very viable. All right, let's take a look at this. Let's go back here. So podcasting has 6 pillars that are really, really, really important. Recording a show, putting it out to the world is not enough. This whole Kevin Costner idea, if you build it, they will come, just doesn't happen. You have to work through and think through the whole process. And there are 6 pillars of this process. And I want to share with you just a couple of thoughts and a couple of ideas on all of these. David Jackson, School of Podcasting. Hey, David. David says, I could spend more time promoting and less time producing. A lot of us could. And these are the options here. So let's chat about the 6 pillars of podcasting. The first thing is the plan. You have to plan out your podcast. You got to understand what your audience is. You got to understand what your message is. You got to understand what your format is. You got to get the title of the show. You got to figure out frequency. You got to understand revenue models. You got to understand your show hosting options. You got to come up with a plan for your podcast. That's the first thing you got to do. Sadly, I've had people who've called me, Paul, I bought the equipment, Paul, I bought the courses, Paul, I bought the high definition video studio. Now what do? First step is plan. If you don't plan, the old classic, failing to plan is planning to fail. Planning is the first step of podcasting. You absolutely must plan. The second pillar of podcasting is produce, or called production. And one of the things I have in production is I have this concept of ease casting. And I've been chatting about ease casting for a long time. The idea of ease casting is to make the process of podcasting as easy as is humanly possible for you. Josh Freiberg here popped up. Josh records his stuff and then his editor goes in and cleans things up. I've got clients who literally go to a bridge line. They record the show. They hang up. I make that a podcast. I'm going to be showing a little bit easier about talking into my phone and making that a podcast. Once you figure out production so that it's easy, you're going to be in a much different place. I've got one client who has a, CD of the month club. He has a recording studio with a full-time recording engineer. So his ease casting process is simply going into the studio and recording his stuff. But it's really, really, really important to have a production model that makes sense. So you got to do ease casting. You got to obey the rule of 10. You got to understand how you're going to archive your media and record your media, how you're going to create it, how you're going to edit it, how you're going to convert it, how you're going to do tagging, how you're going to do album art. And that production process needs to be understood. Is it all going to be you? Is it going to be done by hand? Is it going to be automated? Are you going to outsource it? What are you going to do? That's the production model for all of this, which is really, really, really key. The next step in podcasting is promotion. And promotion is just understanding basic things like, where do audiences come from? There's this idea, this misnomer, and Dave Jackson here can laugh with me. There's this idea that, you put yourself on iTunes promotes you, instantly you've got an audience of thousands. That's just not the case. You got to understand where audiences come from, and you got to understand how to get them and where to find more of them to build out your show. You got to understand listeners versus subscribers. You got to understand iTunes. You got to understand how promotion happens, what it looks like when it's good, about getting on new and notable. You got to understand about being realistic. Promotion is key. The next pillar of podcasting is just managing. Once you've got a plan, once you've got a production model that works, and once you're promoting your show, you got to figure out what is working well and what isn't working. And get this, you got to do more of what is working well versus what is not working well. And so you got to manage the show. You got to understand the big picture. You got to understand what you can manage and what you can't manage. And you also really have to understand the difference in stats versus results. 1,000 downloads. So what? Dave just said in chat, 34 downloads. So what? The stats versus the results. Now, if that was 34 downloads by, the President of the United States of America and everybody in his cabinet, that's really, really, really important. If it's 34 downloads by a robot, not important. What's the difference between stats and results? How do you do that? What do you manage for? How do you do calls to action? What are the tools that are out there? And these are the types of things you need to do in management, which is really, really, really key. The next thing in podcasting, and I get some flack for this, but it's just the idea of multicasting. The idea that once your content is there, you want to be everywhere. Now, I owe this one to Dave, but for the longest time, my mom could not listen to her son's podcasts because she was not, an Apple user. And God bless her, she's a wonderful woman, but there it is. And so I go over to her house, her apartment, and she's got her Kindle Fire, and she's got the iHeartRadio app. And I go, hey, Mom, how did you get that? Well, the people on the radio told me to. And I go, Mom, I'm on that. And I pull up my name and I pull up my show and, she's happy about her son. And then, wait a minute, you're on the radio? No, I'm not on the radio. But Paul, you're on iHeartRadio. Well, exactly. You want to put your stuff in as many places as is humanly possible. My stuff's on iHeartRadio. I even did once, as a test of all this, I actually took transcripts from my show. You can go to Amazon, you can type in the podcast report, check this out. The podcast report transcripts from my show are there, and you can buy them. And the best part is, if you look at people like David Jackson or Ed Rush or Rob Walsh or Gary Leland, some of the people I've had on the show, the transcripts from this show pop up. What you want to do is you want to multicast your show. You want to take your content, make it available everywhere. Make it available in Kindle books. Make it available on radio shows. Make it available as downloads. Make it available on CD. Make it available on preloaded media players. Just make it available. You want to get your content everywhere. You got to understand the additional sales that come from that. And then, of course, the flip side of it is you could do something like start with a podcast, go other places, or you could go other places and end up with a podcast. You can do things like live casting. With things like Periscope and Blab and Google Hangouts and what we're doing here, we could be at a really, really, really interesting place. So that's multicasting. And then the last part of all this is just simply merging. Merging is where you bring it all together to form your business. A lot of times people have their business and then they have their podcast over here. I call it the one-eared Mickey Mouse. And, they kind of do this on the side. The podcast is not part of their business. Once you've got a plan, once you've got production that works, once you've got a promotion model that makes sense, then you're managing it and doing more of what works and less of what doesn't work. And then you're multicasting, getting your content out everywhere. You begin to fold this thing in your business, and it becomes a very, very cool, very, very viable business. One of the things we're going to be chatting about a little bit later here is just the simple idea of folding this into your business. And I'm going to be sharing with you what I'm doing with season 2 of the podcast report. And that's the merging side of things. So anyway, those are the 6 pillars of podcasting. And they're key. They're vital. Podcasting is so much more than how do I do this? What microphone do I buy? That kind of thing. It's a whole plan of a whole process of planning, producing, promoting, managing, multicasting, then merging it into your business. Once you do that, you are in a much better place. Going back here into the chat, Robert Miller says, easecasting with something like Boss Jock sounds like good for a solo show. How would that work with an interview-based show with recorded interviews? Well, easecasting is not a process, Robert. Easecasting is a state of mind. I've got one client, does an interview show, and the audio files in this will go, oh, that's terrible. But when I tell you their numbers, person number 1 calls in to a phone line. Person number 2 calls in to the same phone line. And then the person they're interviewing calls into the phone line. and then they record the show. And when they're done with the interview, they hang up. That's it. That's their podcasting side of things. Then the team comes in, takes the file that comes from that, edits it, puts in the music, publishes it, that kind of thing. Oh, how good of a podcast can that be? Millions of downloads. Millions of downloads. Very real profit. All from calling into a phone. Just kind of the way it is. Hey, Yael's having a hard time. And she's going to catch the replay. Sorry about that. That sometimes happens. Josh wants to know where monetization fits into the 6 pillars. Monetization fits into the 6 pillars on the very first step. You got to have a plan to monetize. If you don't have a plan to monetize, stop it. Don't go any further. So many people podcast with, podcast your passions and the profits will follow. That's just not the way it goes. So, podcast production with a phone. Okay. So when I do Thinking Out Loud, it's the ultimate in easecasting. Now, version 1 of Thinking Out Loud had a lot of subscribers. There are actually points where that was getting more downloads than the podcast report was, and it's going to take a little while to build that up. Unfortunately, that was on a platform that's no longer available. One of the things about planning is don't put yourself on a platform that can do what this platform did to me. That podcast is dead. I've reintroduced it out, but now because of all the tech that's available, literally pull up a phonic, literally record the show, fill out the form, everything else happens. Now, the first thing that comes to folk are going to say, is the phone good enough? Well, a couple things. I've got this iRig mic lav here. This is what I've been doing the last couple of episodes with. This plugs into my iPhone. It's a good lav mic. I can put it on my shirt. What's interesting here, as you can see, we'll go a little bit bigger here. As it focuses in on that, will it focus in on that? Basically, I've got the ability to plug in a second microphone if I wanted to, so the two of us could have lavs and we could record this kind of thing. And I do all the production on the show. Now, does it sound like I'm in a studio? No. Does it sound like the microphone that I have right now for this? No. But the fact of the matter is people don't care. It becomes theater of the mind. People are understanding. A lot of times I'll do it in the car. I'll do it while walking around. One of these days I actually want to do it while I'm on the treadmill and see what happens there. I think that would be absolutely fascinating. And when I tell them what I'm doing, where I'm calling from, a lot of times I'll even share the microphone that I'm on. If I forget the lav, I might just use the microphone that's on the phone itself, or I might use cheap earbuds. I'm not the type of guy who spends a lot of money on earbuds. And but it's okay, I share that. Now I might grab my good microphone and do a great episode, a high quality episode there, but people don't care. Nobody has ever complained about the quality of the audio when I do a podcast. And nobody's ever complained about the quality of the show where the guys phone it in, because the content is so incredible. The theater of the mind is important. Set things up. Let them know what's happening. Obviously, if you're in a situation where you're trying to pass yourself off, if you've got a show called, How to Sound Like $1 Million While Recording, and you're doing it on a lav mic in the car with it making noises in the background, you're going to have bad audio. But if you're delivering information, you're good there. Josh said a little bit earlier, he'd love to do more live events. Live events is going to have noise in the background. That's just the way it is. People don't care. Question came in. What's the mic? It's the iRig mic lav. It's new. They sent me one. Pretty cool stuff. Pretty excited about that. But anyway, it's possible to podcast with nothing but the phone. And if you are a podcast expert blueprint member, you actually, the entire process, every single step of Thinking Out Loud, when I set up inside of a phonic, when I set it up inside of Libsyn, when I set up the publishing, it was about 22 minutes total of recording. You have access to that. So speaking of podcast expert blueprint, let me log in really quickly and see if there's any questions from you blueprinters, because I've got a different screen running. You guys saw last week when I had that problem, and it could be this software that's causing that. So we have a different screen running. I'm just going to do a quick refresh here, see if there's anything that I've got to say. Nope. Elaine's happy that she got her mind map. I'm thrilled that you got your mind map, Elaine. If you guys have any questions, I will pop in here on a regular basis and check from there. But you can produce with a phone. You can produce, with a dumb phone. If you call in somewhere, you can produce with a mic. Right now, one of my favorite mics. I like the Nessie mic, and the Nessie mic, it retails for $199, or $199 is the standard manufacturer price. It's cheaper a lot of times, a lot of places. It seems like every time I look it up at Amazon, they have a different price for it. But the fact of the matter, it's a great mic. You can do great recording on there. So, where I'm going, I want to chat a little bit about where I'm going with the podcast report. I want to chat a little bit with where I'm taking my clients. And I want to chat a little bit about case studies and limited students and kind of what I'm doing inside of the Podcast Expert Blueprint. So, where I'm going with the podcast report. I recently signed off for season 1 of the podcast report. And I know Josh is crying about that, but deal with it, guys. The podcast report has been shut down for season 1. I did just launch an app for the podcast report. And if you go to Isyacht, you can also look this up in the iTunes store. But if you go to isyacht.com/podcast report app, you can see I've got the app. Now, the beautiful thing about this app is actually something that Libsyn will create for you automatically if you're on the $20 or higher plan. And we're in a good place there. By having an app, I can send information to the app users. I've got more screen space. I've done another video on this, but the fact of the matter is, going to apps. I am going to season 2. The thing about season 2 that is very, very important is season 2, I'm going to be pushing people to the app. And remember that universal search thing, that Apple TV thing, some of the things I chatted about earlier. All this is very strategic, very, very viable, very, very real, very, very on purpose. I'm doing that. Every episode, I'm going to focus on getting an opt-in, getting an email address. Where I'm taking my clients, next year, most of my clients are also going in that direction. We're building shows for the purpose of building out the app or building out the mailing list. There's some revenue there, and I'm going to run you through some money situations here that I think are really, really interesting. But this is the focus of what I'm looking to do and where I want to go, and I really, really encourage you do the same. For my students inside of the Podcast Expert Blueprint, we're going to be taking a look at both of these issues a lot more in depth. I'm going to be automating some things, and we're going to be doing some things in smaller batches, so it won't always be open, but we're at an interesting place. Anyway, enough about where I'm going. So, podcast monetization with opt-ins. I want to run some numbers here. If you're not a numbers person, you're just going to have to trust me on this, but here's the deal. Actually, let's take a couple of comments here. Elizabeth Harrington says, hey, I'm on HD and Safari. It's going better. Elizabeth says she loves the app. Great. Josh says the app works for potential listeners and subscribers who don't listen to podcasts. Yes. Yale says I got both of them now, Elizabeth. They caught up, took off HD, working better. Oh well. The travails of doing things live and online. So let's talk the money of podcast monetization with opt-ins. A lot of people like to think of podcasting solely from an ad insertion model. Put in an ad, make some money. The model's fine, but it's not my favorite. Obviously, the more downloads you get, the more money you make. But there are other ways that you can make more money. And what I want to do is I just want to share with you some numbers I've been running that kind of dictate why I'm going to this download model. Basically, here's the deal. It starts up at the top, 40 CPM. What that means is if you have a podcast and you do ads on it, you're going to get something CPM. That's how much you get per 1,000 downloads. Now, 40 CPM is extremely crazy, over the top generous. People are getting that. Usually they're giving half to their agent who finds that for them and that type of thing. Definitely a high-end number, but let's just use that number as a base. So you get 1,000 downloads, you get $40, which basically means you get about 4 cents per download. Now, I ran on the last episode of the podcast report. I tried to get an opt-in. I tried to get people to sign up for a little giveaway that I was doing. 6.98%. So basically, I need less than 15 downloads to get an email. And, if we want to compare that to the $40, it cost me less than 60 cents to buy a targeted name. And basically, per 1,000 downloads, I get 66 emails. And if I made $1 per email address, I'm making $66, which is more than 50% more than I'm making the other way. And I have a mailing list. Now, for those of you who are following along with all of this, great. For those of you who aren't, basically, here's the deal. The money in getting an email address is a lot better than the money of doing ads. And obviously, an email lasts a lot longer. So, but let's take this through. Let's take this through deeper here. Okay, let's say you've got a podcast that's got 500 downloads an episode. That's actually very generous for a lot of podcasts. If you've seen some of my presentations, previous episodes, the podcast report, you're at about 137 downloads per episode is the median. But let's go with 500 downloads as an episode. That's 33.33 email addresses. Let's move that to 33 to make it easier. You do one a week, 52 weeks a year. That's 1,716 names on your mailing list. 500 downloads an episode, 1,716 names on your mailing list. If that's worth $1 a name, that's $1,716. As opposed to, it would take you 42,900 downloads to make that same amount of money in an ad rate that is really unreasonable. And so I'm going to just ask you this: which is easier to do, 26,000 downloads or 42,900 downloads? Obviously 26,000 downloads. And then, of course, if you're grabbing opt-ins, you end with a list of 1,716 names, or you end up with nothing. Doing email is incredibly important. Email is a gift that keeps giving even after they've left. Sending a weekly email to your audience is very, very acceptable. You can put affiliate ads inside of emails that you don't share. You can charge real money for your own product. An email list is extremely powerful. Email list is extremely and I want you to do this. I encourage you to do this. Consider building an email list for your podcast. Do it through the app. Do it through just calls to action. Give them something more valuable. You'll see me doing more and more of this, but I really, really recommend email. Let's go to questions here. Dennis says, the app is not a blog and app form. It's more of an extension of info delivery. Great question, Dennis. Actually, that's what I've got next. Let's chat about podcast apps here, okay? 7 reasons to do a podcast app. Number 1, real estate. If I have, well, let me pull this up here. Man, I'm so glad this is going well and we haven't frozen yet. Okay, here is my screen. There's the podcast. There's the podcasts app that has all the podcasts I listen to. There's the app with the podcast report, and there's the How to Podcast app. Some of you are actually watching this on the How to Podcast app on your own iPhone, so thank you so much for watching that. This kind of real estate is extremely powerful. This kind of real estate is hard to get. Every time somebody looks at their phone, they see my imagery, my iconography. If I've got a new episode out, there's the little number down there. I can push things out. I can push messages out. A number of you are watching this inside of the app, and you're watching this because I pushed a message to you that said you can watch this inside of the app, and then I actually gave you the ability to click on a button to watch this thing inside of the app. Doing AirPlay if you wanted to your Apple TV. Real estate is huge. Positioning is huge. Cindy mentioned this earlier. Having a podcast, there's X amount of people who do podcasts. Having an app with content, a lot more people. The app industry is huge. And if you want to hear about something more from an app or a podcast, be on the app. This is part of the whole multicasting thing that I was chatting about earlier. Being everywhere on purpose is extremely powerful. Now, at the time of the recording, right now, these apps are only available in the iTunes marketplace, but don't worry, the Android versions are being worked out, and even the Windows phone version of this is being worked out. And the joke is for all 7 of them, and anybody inside of the Podcast Expert Blueprint for next year will be chatting about that as well. But positioning is huge. Search is huge. I can't really go over this on the screen here, but if you have my How to Podcast app installed and you search for podcast monetization, my article comes up. You search for podcasting, my articles come up. You search for different terms, my articles come up. As more and more people download this, this might make its way into Safari search as well. I've seen some studies where some things have happened. How cool would that be to be inside of search? A rewarding consumption. Right now, One of my most popular episodes of all of season 1 of the podcast report was one on the 4 M's of podcasting. And people always ask about it. People have questions about it. What I did was I made a PDF of the 4 M's of podcasting, and I made it available only in the app. And that's something you can do with Libsyn. Not that complicated at all. And by making the 4M's available only inside of the app, I've got people who are downloading the app. I'm rewarding consumption. Push notifications are huge. Being able to catch people on their devices is amazing. And then deep links are also very, very important. What deep links are the ability to... Sorry about the squeeze there. I just had to readjust things, and this chair is way too squeaky for a live webcast. Deep links is the ability to send people right to something inside of the app. For those of you who watch this as a result of the push notification, I didn't say open up the app and look for it. I sent you right to that page that had it. So it's there. It's powerful. Now, I know a question that's going to come up here is, why do you have 2 apps? Well, here's the thing. An app is going to get me more people than the podcast would. But here's the interesting thing. An app about the industry is going to get me more interest than my show is going to get. So I think the future for podcasts is going to really be 2 apps. One about the industry, my How to Podcast app, and then an app for the show, the Podcast Report app. These 2 can promote each other, can market each other, can go do some really, really cool things. What's neat here is if you look at the How to Podcast app by Paul Colligan, you'll notice more by Paul Colligan will take you over to, the Podcast Report. And it'll show you that app as well, or back and forth. This cross promotion positions me as a real player inside of the industry, and these 2 focuses are really powerful. So Dennis asks, so the app is not a blog in app form, but an extension of info delivery? You bet, buddy. Step that only goes to the app, things I can only do with the app, impact I can only have with the app. Really, really powerful, really, really viable. So, so if you look at how all of this comes together, okay, things are shifting. Universal search, apps on television sets, too much content. Really have to nicheify. I really got to target. I really got to get right to my audience. I'm doing that with apps, and I'm doing that with shows that are generating email addresses for me. And I'm also using tools to automate the production process and the promotion process so I can get things done really, really, really quickly. I'm planning my show first. The monetization's figured out there based on these new things, producing, promoting, managing, multicasting, and merging this into my business. The podcast report is becoming a big part of Colligan.com, and the Podcast Expert Blueprint is being sold as a result of the podcast report, which is becoming a big part of Colligan.com. I'm merging the podcast into the business, and I'm doing so much better than $40, per CPM downloads. And I'll tell you, my show doesn't get downloaded in the thousands of episodes. It's not. If I did this solely for the $40 inclusion thing, yeah, I wouldn't be doing this. I would have a day job. Podcast production with a phone, making these things really, really easy is something that I'm dedicated to do. I'm going to be exploring this further and further, and takes some leadership there. I'm going apps, I'm going email addresses, and it's really, really, really key. The money on email addresses is really viable, and I'm doing podcast apps. Josh wants to know, how does the app get you the email? How does it get you sales? Well, really easy. The app can send people to sign up for newsletters and things. I can give away content in the app. I can also give away content in the app for an email address. I can also give away content in the app if they sign up to get information. I can have people go newsletters, that type of thing. Very, very viable. A little bit more than the Libsyn app does at this point. Part of why I had to go externally. David Jackson wants to know, are you going to share who the developer is on the non-Libsyn app? Right now, I do not have the liberty to say that, but trust you me this, if you monitor what I'm doing, I'll be announcing that very, very soon. It is incredibly affordable. And like podcasting, the tech part is going to be easy. The implementation and the strategy part of it is where we want to focus and what we want to do. So what do we do with this? Where do we go with this? This is my gift to podcasters and people thinking about podcasting. This is where I'm going next year. Join me, download the apps, watch it happen, listen to the show, deconstruct, grab everything you can. A lot of you are going to take that. Some of you are going to want to join me for the Podcast Expert Blueprint. As you can see, it's all the teaching. And what's neat for the teaching here is if you take things like, have a video where I go through the overview, and it's only 4 minutes and 52 seconds. It's talking head stuff, and it's the type of thing where I'll train you through a specific element, and then you can ask questions, and you can go from there. I go through all 6 of them, whole bunch of bonuses. What's interesting is we do live events. Right now I've got the big broadcast, which is something that people are looking at. We do Q&A events. In January, I'm doing an event called Make This Your Podcast Year. Some really specific ways for people to take podcasting and what they're doing. I also do Q&A, and this is fun. In the Q&A events, I answer questions that haven't been answered yet inside the program. Sometimes I don't get something in the video. So what happens is during the Q&A questions, somebody does something like asks, could you please explain the format for the podcast report and why you do it the way you do? Should I plan on putting my podcast on CD? Do we need to set up a blog or website? So a bunch of questions get asked. And then when I do the Q&A events, people get their questions answered. And then what we do is we have short little questions, where they get answered. 4 minutes, 2 minutes, 3 minutes. They're all about that size. So it's the so that's the product, and then there's some groups, and there's some ways for people to interact with each other online. A ton of fun, and of course a dashboard that takes you right through the start of it. Bonuses right now, and actually I should probably explain. You can head out to the podcastexpertblueprint.com. That's this link you can see right here. Podcastexpertblueprint.com. That'll take you out to the order for this. Also take you out to the mind map for this. Those of you watching this live, obviously you've got the ability to grab this tonight. If you're watching a recording of this and I've closed up the shop or changed the bonuses or that type of thing, that's the way it is. If we close it up, we'll take a waiting list. And when you're inside, you'll understand why I'm doing things the way I'm doing things. It makes a lot of sense. Right now, I've got some bonuses that are kind of fun. And we'll go to podcastexpertblueprint.com, walk you through all of the bonuses that we're doing. Number 1 is full access to the entire show. Or full access to the entire training program, everything, the bonuses, lifetime access. If I ever shut this down, I'll give you access to the recordings. 2016, your year for podcasting, 2 additional live Q&A sessions I'm doing. Obviously, if you get in now, you'll be able to ask questions. Of course, a lot of them have already been answered inside of the program. Promotion from me once episode 5 of your podcast has been released. Let me show you what that looks like. Josh here, who's on the show. I recently promoted his show. Joe has Concept Run training here. And, basically I promote your show. I tell people about it. And what's fun here is, Josh is able to describe what it is that he's doing. Because of my podcast and the methods and models Paul has shown me, I've owned, mastered my message, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Josh says nice things about me. It makes sense for me to promote my students because it shows people what you can do with podcasting. So I will promote you if you have a show past 5 episodes that's any good, because it only makes sense for what I'm doing. Now I'm going to promote you on social media. I'm going to promote you on Facebook. I'll put you reoccurring inside of Twitter. What I realized I can do too, and this just hit me today, and I'm kind of embarrassed to admit that it just hit me. I could certainly put a directory of student podcasts in the back of any podcast books I do. Makes a total bunch of sense. So I'm going to promote you. 30-minute Skype session coupon. One of the things I do. Let's get my big head out of the way there. Boop. All right. Some people like to do this right at the beginning, work on the plan part. Some people like to go all the way through this. And what we do is we do 30 minutes by Skype. We do it by video. I record the whole thing. I make it available as an unlisted video. We open up a Google document and we pound through your biggest questions that might be personalized. I had a woman with a very sensitive topic. She wanted to figure out how to do podcasting. She was thinking kind of awkward putting that inside of just the normal Q&A sessions. Sometimes it's a technical issue. Sometimes it's these types of things. Now, this next bonus, and I know people who came into Podcast Expert Blueprint 2015 are screaming, I want this too. The automated phone podcasting setup, we'll do that for you. We'll go through the entire process, set up the entire thing for you. And what does that mean? Well, that means we're going to give you a form. You got to fill out logins and passwords for things, and we'll set this thing up for you. You got to get your own accounts and that kind of thing, but we will set this thing up for you. If you came into Podcast Expert Blueprint in 2015, we will give that to you as well. Don't worry about that. The next thing is album art coupon. A lot of people get freaked out where to do their album art. We'll have our guy do that for you, and you can pick that up. And then a Yeti microphone shipped to you. I got a bunch of Yetis. I actually worked with Blue, and I've got a pallet of these bad boys, and used a bunch of them earlier, and need to clean out the pallet, and need to stop paying my warehouse fees. So everybody who signs up for this gets a Yeti microphone. So, $997 plus $497 plus $497 plus $497 plus $199 plus $199. Some very, very cool bonuses. The stuff with stars, as you can see here, they got to be redeemed within 6 months from purchase. We're not going to be doing a Skype session in 4 years, but 6 months certainly is going to give you more than enough time. And that's only on the album art, the podcasting setup, and the Skype session. The rest of these you can do lifetime-wise. And this is my program. This is what I'm doing. This is where I'm focusing a whole bunch of things. And I would love to have you inside of that. Again, podcastexpertblueprint.com. If you visit and it's open, you're welcome to come in. If you visit and the bonuses have changed, This setting it up, the automation for people, I think that's going to be a time taker, and I got to be careful there not to do too many of those. If you show up and we're in a situation where we're closed, then we'll take names and we'll alert you next time it's open. But that's the way we go there. So Q&A. I have been running Q&A answering through everyone. So there's no QA for me to pick up with. But if you have any Q&A, either about the Podcast Expert Blueprint system or just any of the stuff I covered today, go ahead and set that up. Elizabeth wanted to know, are we using Kajabi? Yes, we are using Kajabi. And why are we using Kajabi? Because it's what I know. The content there is much better. Inside of the system, look at that. Dorothy just said, no Q, just hi. Dorothy, Podcast Expert Blueprint member, and Elaine got her mind map as well. So very, very cool, guys. Josh says, thank you for the shout out. You are welcome, Josh. It's fun to promote your students, because what happens is when you get to be a podcast teacher, when someone does their podcast intelligently, things change. Actually, I didn't tell you this, Josh, but I was at lunch with coffee, actually, with a friend who said, Paul, I've really been trying to focus, and I've been listening to Josh's One Thing podcast, and it's helping me to focus. And here's Josh having impact on a guy who, he doesn't even know he's having the impact on this guy. It's helping him focus. Josh has been able to get some really decent speaking gigs as a result of his podcast, far better than this $40 per 1,000 download type of thing. If that's all he made, he would have quit this thing a long time ago. It's neat to show, when I did this in 2014, I had some Chinese herbalists, and I had some very different people outside of the marketing space and the internet space, and promoted them, and that's a ton of fun. But what happens here is you start to build a real tribe. If you watch this live, you got to see some of the questions from people, some of the comments from people who are doing this live. It's a neat place to be, and it's really, really cool. It's empowering. There's the question about the cars, and every American car has that, and that's by default. And then, like Dave said, the ability to plug in your phone and Bluetooth, and even if it's not Bluetooth, you can plug it in through some of these contraptions and whatnot. Our van has one of those old cassette adapters with the plug that plugs right into the iPhone, and my kids love to do that. Being able to replace someone's drive time with content about who they are and what it is they're doing, and making them better is a really, really cool place to be. And it's just exciting to be able to promote podcasters and to promote some of the opportunities that are out there. So this is the big broadcast. Thrilled to share it with you. It's a ton of fun. You can head out to Podcast Expert Blueprint to get the entire mind map if you want to work through this for yourself. We'd love to have you join us inside of the Podcast Expert Blueprint if that makes sense for you. If you really want to take podcasting to the next level and bring yourself to where this becomes part of your business, where you merge it with what it is that you're doing, we'd love to have you do that. We'll close it up pretty quickly. This does not pay all the bills. It's just a slow trickle that comes in very, very strategically. Again, if you listen to the replay of this and it's been locked up, we'll take a list, and when it opens up again, we'll let you know. Bonuses will change, but that's just kind of the game there. But this has been the big broadcast. You have been watching it. I have been presenting it. We stuck into an hour, which I'm really, really excited about. And looks like we had no technical difficulties, which makes things much easier for me. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll stick around a little bit and answer any questions that might come in as a result of the delay that happens for something like this. But I want to let everybody go. I want everybody to have a great night, and I will chat with you soon. Thanks again for watching. Bye.